I never thought that folding clothes in my own room would be the beginning of the worst humiliation of my life. I was there with the floral bath towel in my hands when my son Mark stood in front of me with that dry smile I didn't recognize. "Pack your bags, Ma. You're going to a residence next week. That's what's better for you. At your age, you can no longer live alone." My body went cold. The midday heat wasn't enough to melt the ice that ran down my back. He meant it, just like that, without beating around the bush. "Sorry," I barely managed to say. "It's not a discussion, Ma. It's already decided." He had already packed half of my things. The boxes were lined up next to the sofa, like soldiers waiting for orders to march. Not a word, not a question, nothing. Just the verdict. I noticed something sticking out of his briefcase, a folder with papers. I approached, trying to understand. There was my address on a real estate document. My name was nowhere visible. "What is this, Mark?" I asked, though my voice sounded shakier than I would have liked. He closed it quickly and said, without looking at me, "It's my thing. Don't worry." But I was already worried a lot. There was something different in his eyes. It wasn't concern, it wasn't compassion. It was pride, as if he had done something smart, as if he were solving a problem. And that problem was me. For years, I had refused to see the signs, ignored birthdays, increasingly shorter visits, calls that turned into silences. I always found excuses: work, stress, life. But this had no excuse. This was betrayal, plain and simple. I turned the wedding ring I still wore, an old habit. My husband died 20 years ago, but he left me this house, this life. Every brick of this home we built together. And now Mark, our only son, was planning to put me in a residence, as if I were a burden that got in the way. I said nothing more, not at that moment. But that night, while the house slept, something in me woke up. A firm, old voice said, "No, ma'am, your story doesn't end here." I looked at him from the kitchen while he was talking on the phone, laughing as if the world belonged to him. And it was there, in the middle of that darkness, when I decided I wasn't going to let them erase me as if I had never mattered. If he thought this house was his, a surprise awaited him, because I still had something he didn't know: memory, will, and papers stored where no one imagined. That night, I didn't sleep a wink, not from lack of tiredness, but from a feeling rumbling in my chest. I sat in bed, wrapped in my flannel robe, listening. I've always said you don't need detectives when you have a good ear and timing. Mark was in the living room, talking on the phone. He didn't bother to lower his voice. Yes, the cash comes in this week. Everything is ready. My mother doesn't even know she's no longer in the picture. She's just dead weight." I closed my eyes. That's what he called me, dead weight. After raising him alone since he was 5, after ironing every school shirt, spending nights by his side with a fever, that was me. Now, I got up quietly. The wooden floor creaked a little, but I know every floorboard in this house. I went straight to my dresser, where I kept a copy of my husband's will and the property title. I always kept them folded inside a manila envelope, just in case. But when I opened the drawer, there was nothing: no will, no copy of the title, not even the tax receipts. Empty. My heart started beating fast, too fast. "Calm down," I told myself, holding onto the edge of the furniture. "It has to be somewhere else." I looked in my box of memories in the safe hidden under the shoe rack, even among the recipe folders. Nothing. It was then I knew. Mark had gone through my things. The sweat ran down the back of my neck. I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands. My own son, the child who cried when he couldn't find his stuffed teddy bear, was now stealing my legal documents to sell a house that didn't belong to him, my home. I stood up, took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let this break me, not after everything I'd endured in this life. I went to the kitchen, boiled water, prepared my chamomile tea, and drank it slowly, holding the cup with both hands as if it were a talisman. If he dared to do this, I would dare to defend what was mine. I knew something didn't add up, but I also knew I wasn't alone. I had contacts, memory, and a clean name. He might have papers, but I had history and the roots of this house. If he wanted war, I was going to fight quietly, legally, but forcefully. The next morning, I went to the back garden. I needed to breathe. Between the roses and the rosemary, I felt more like myself. I always did. Every plant in that patio has a history and name. We planted the first rose together, my husband and I, the day we moved in. He dug the hole. I put the rose bush in. It was yellow. He said yellow brought joy, and for many years, it was like that, simple joy. Coffee at 6, dancing in the kitchen, laughter that filled the hallways. He died on a cold February day, dry and treacherous. He left me this house in his will, his last gesture of love. And here I was, 20 years later, talking to the roses as if they were old friends. Because, in truth, I left my youth, my dreams, and also my tears in this place. And now my son wanted to take that away, like it was an old piece of furniture. I crouched by the hedge and pulled out a dry leaf. "Mark," I whispered, feeling my chest burn. "How did we get to this?" I gave him everything. When his dad died, I didn't have time to grieve. I had a child to raise. I left my office job, took 2 cleaning jobs, and yet he never lacked a book, a lunchbox, a clean blanket. And now I was a hindrance. I sat on the little wooden bench, the one he helped me paint when he was 8 years old. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from sadness. Where was my son? Where was that child who cried if I cut myself cooking, who wrote me "I love Mom" notes with crayons? The worst part wasn't the betrayal, no. The worst was that it hurt so much because I still loved him. He was my only son. I had no one else. After him, I was told my body couldn't have more, and I didn't care. I thought Mark was enough. I bet my whole life on that love. I taught him that respect begins at home, that no one abandons their own, that in this family, we don't leave ours behind. And here I was, about to be discarded. I wiped my tears with the hem of my apron. I wasn't going to cry anymore for someone who had already decided to forget me. I turned my wedding ring again, that gesture I never lost. And there, between the lavender and bougainvillea, I made a promise. They're not going to erase me as if I had never existed. This house was not just wood and bricks. It was the last part of me that remained standing, and I was going to defend it, even if I had to do it alone. Saturday morning, I called Nora. I've known her since the years when I still curled my hair with rollers. A real friend, the kind who doesn't ask how you are out of obligation, but because they want to listen. We met at our usual diner. I ordered coffee with milk and toast. Nora, as always, her black tea, no sugar. She looked at me straight, no nonsense. "You look like you want to set fire to something," she said, half joking. "Someone," I replied. And we both laughed with that dry humor that only comes with age. I told her everything about the "you're going to a residence," the boxes, the strange document with my address, and, most seriously, that the copy of my deed had disappeared. She stayed silent, stirring her tea. Then she leaned toward me, lowering her voice. "Did you sign any power of attorney that allows him to act on your behalf?" "Never," I said firmly. "Then they can't sell the house without you, not legally." My heart stopped for a second. "What if someone forges something?" "Well, that's a crime," she said bluntly. "But yes, if someone forges a signature or a power of attorney and makes it look legitimate, it can go through a procedure without you realizing until it's too late." The toast stuck in my throat. It wasn't a crazy suspicion, it was possible. And if Mark was talking about money coming in cash, then he had already taken steps. Dirty steps. "And how can I check?" I asked, knuckles clenched. "Go to the property registry, ask for the latest deed. If your name is no longer there, that's where the fight begins." The fight. I felt the world align. I wasn't crazy or exaggerating. It was real, and I had a starting point. Nora touched my hand. "You're no fool, and you're not alone. Go for that copy, and if something smells bad, let me know." We hugged before leaving, and in that hug, I felt something I had lost among so many disappointments: hope. Back home, while Mark watched football as if he didn't have a mother he had just tried to erase, I was already planning, silently but firmly. If he thought he was going to get rid of me with a folder of papers, I was going to show him that this woman has memory, contacts, and fire, a fire that doesn't go out with threats. On Monday, I went straight to the public library. I didn't have a computer at home and even less desire to use Mark's. I didn't want him to suspect anything. That morning, I left saying I was going to the pharmacy, and technically, I did go to buy my chamomile tea, but my real destination was clear. I walked down the digital archives hallway like I was looking for something sacred. I had an old USB in my bag with a scan I had made years ago at Nora's insistence. When I was still working in the titles office, she had told me, "You never know, so keep a copy just in case." Thank God I listened to her. I sat in front of the monitor, connected the USB, and opened the file. There it was, my husband's will in his firm handwriting and that signature I would recognize among 1,000. The house was in my name exclusively. My breathing slowed, deepened, as if each word in that document was a lifeline. I opened another tab and went to the tax registration site. It's public, anyone can see the name on the properties. I typed the address. Enter. Name of the owner, Margaret L. Hawkins. Me. No Mark, no one else. I smiled, not a happy smile, no. A slow smile, the kind that forms when you confirm you weren't crazy, that maternal instinct, the one so many dismiss, was right. I saved everything back on the USB, deleted the history, and logged out. Then I sat for a moment on one of the wooden benches and took a deep breath. Mark had lied, or worse, had done something illegal to force a sale he had no right to do. Whatever it wasn't an assumption, it was a certainty. I stood up calmly. The plan had changed. It was no longer just about resisting, now it was about acting, because now I had proof. That night, while he ate leftovers without offering me a plate, I boiled my chamomile in silence. I smoothed the tablecloth with one hand, turned my ring with the other, and thought, if he wants war, it will be a real one, but mine is written with intelligence. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to cry. I was going to strike where it hurt the most, the papers. Because, at the end of the day, documents don't have a heart, but they do have memory. And this house still belonged to me. With the papers safely tucked at the bottom of my bag, I went to see the lawyer. It wasn't just anyone, it was Mr. Holes, a serious man who still wore a tie even though it weighed 30 grams. He received me in a small office with wooden furniture and the smell of old coffee. He offered me a seat, and as soon as he saw the USB, he knew I hadn't come for just any will. "What exactly are you worried about, Mrs. Hawkins?" I told him everything, that my son said the house was no longer mine, that my copies had disappeared, that I heard him talk about a cash deal, and that now I had found evidence that on paper I was still the owner. Holes opened the files, reviewed them silently, and nodded several times. Then, with a deep sigh, he took off his glasses. "Here's the lowdown. If you've never signed a power of attorney or authorized any transfer, then someone had to forge your signature. And that, ma'am, is a serious crime." I swallowed hard. I already suspected it, but hearing it from a lawyer made a chill run down my spine. What should I do? Act. Now. We need to go to the property registry and request the last registered deed. If your name is no longer listed, we have a case of fraud. I stared at the wooden cup holders on his desk. There was a crack in the edge, as if it had endured too many hot cups. "And if it's in my name?" I asked, still holding a thread of hope. "Then you can take steps to shield it. But if there's already been movement, we need to stop it before a firm buyer signs." I turned my wedding ring again, a habit that never leaves me when I tremble inside. "And Mark?" I asked, afraid to say his name in front of a stranger. Holes didn't hesitate. "If your son falsified documents, that doesn't free him. In fact, it sinks him further. You have the right to report it. It's your home, Mrs. Hawkins, and no one has the right to take it away from you." I gave him a copy of everything I had, and before leaving, I looked at him with a mixture of respect and warning. Do not delay. In cases like this, every day counts. I left that office with a troubled heart. The air smelled like a storm, even though the sky was clear. And I thought, this son of mine doesn't know who he messed with. Because I may seem like a harmless grandmother, but when it comes to what's mine, I fight like a wolf. I went to the property registry with my stomach in knots, clutching my bag against my chest like it protected me from the world. The woman at the window was young and friendly. I gave my home address, the parcel number, everything she asked for. As she typed, My heart beat so loudly I feared the whole building could hear it. "One moment, please," she said, looking at the screen. I waited 1 second, 2, 10. Here it is. The last transfer was 4 weeks ago. The new registered owner is Mark Hawkins. My body went cold. Outside, I was whole, but inside, I felt the world collapsing. My head buzzed, like when you stand up too fast. "Can I see a copy?" I asked. She handed me a printed sheet. There was his name, Mark, in big, black letters and a notary's signature I didn't recognize. "Who signed this?" I asked, pointing to the notary. "I don't know that name," she replied. "But if you have doubts about legitimacy, you can challenge it right here." It didn't take me a minute. I called Lawyer Holes from the hallway, telling him everything without taking a breath. "He forged the signature," I said. The phrase tasted like poison. "We're in time," he said. "Come to the office now. We're going to present an alert for fraud and a notice to terminate the transfer." I ran at 68 years old. I ran like I hadn't since Mark was a child, and I lost him in the supermarket. At the office, Holes drafted the document with a firm hand. I signed it, my name in shaky but determined strokes. "That's it," he said. "Now, if he tries to close that sale, the buyer will be notified that the title is in dispute. It cannot go ahead legally." I left the building with the sealed papers in my hand, feeling air enter my lungs again. He thought he was going to kick me out of my house. He thought I was going to stay quiet. But what Mark didn't know is that this old woman not only has history but also resources. And now, the law was on my side. That night, while stirring soup in the kitchen, I heard him come in, his usual whistle, confident, almost arrogant. He'd been out all day. I didn't ask where, it was no longer necessary. He placed his keys on the table and looked out. "They're coming on Tuesday for the visit," he announced with a smile that made my blood run cold. "For the house, you know." Like he was talking about a doctor's appointment or a light bulb change, not stripping me of the only place where my life still had roots. I smiled slowly, serenely. "And who are they?" I asked, as if I had no idea. "A young couple. They're paying in cash, want to close in 2 weeks." I told them the previous owner no longer lives here. He giggled, as if he felt like the most cunning wolf in the forest. My stomach turned, but I showed nothing. I served the soup in 2 bowls, placing one in front of him. "I hope they like the garden." "It's the only thing worth the shame," I said. He settled into the chair without a hint of shame. I nodded, sat calmly, hands together in my lap. I didn't tell him the sale could no longer be made. I didn't tell him the deed was under legal dispute or that the notary who signed didn't exist and the fraud was already reported to the authorities. No, not yet. Why deprive him of the show? I let him enjoy his plate, his plan, his victory, because I knew something he didn't. I knew that when those buyers arrived on Tuesday, they'd meet a legal problem. I knew everything he'd planned so brazenly was going to collapse like a house of cards. And more than that, I knew his pride would hurt more than any scream. So that night, I ate in silence. I recorded the conversation as Holes had told me, marking every word, every phrase. While he talked about the arrangements he supposedly was going to make, I smiled inside. Because sometimes, the best revenge is not a shout, it's a silence that already knows everything. The following days, I became an actress without ever setting foot on a stage. I smiled, cooked, washed, as if nothing was wrong, as if I didn't know he'd robbed my house, as if I didn't know he thought he'd hand it over on a silver platter. But every gesture, every comment of his, I recorded with the phone hidden in my apron. I learned to be stealthy, to give no clues, because Mark's pride was his greatest weakness. He thought he had everything under control, and the more confident he was, the more he spoke, the more he betrayed. One night, while we were eating, he commented, "I hope you don't make a scandal when they move. I don't want you to get emotional." "Of course not, son," I said in a soft voice. "Whatever has to happen will happen." And I pressed the red button under the table. Every sentence like that was pure gold for my lawyer. I sent the audios to Holes as soon as Mark was asleep, and he filed them away patiently, methodically. I already had photos of the forged document, the signature of the alleged notary, and the legal records proving my ownership. "This is going well," Holes said in our last call. It won't stay like this. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. I returned to watering the plants, reading my mystery novels, drinking my chamomile tea every night, as always. The routine held while the world rearranged itself, but deep down, I knew the storm hadn't arrived yet. Mark talked about Tuesday as if it were the big day, the day everything would be resolved, as if life was a property handed over with a handshake and a fake smile. He didn't know that Tuesday was also my day, because I was no longer the mother crying in the garden. I was the woman who had decided to fight, with the law on my side, the truth in the papers, and a network of witnesses growing with each recording. So I pretended. With every smile I gave him, I set a trap. With every meal I served, I prepared the terrain. He thought he was the hunter, but he'd forgotten something important. Mothers who have survived grief, abandonment, unpaid bills don't go down easily. And this time, the one coming for him was me. I returned to Mr. Hull's office on Friday, carrying my bag full of papers, recordings, and even a couple of photos of documents Mark had carelessly left on the dining room table. I had no idea I could read so quickly and memorize so well. Hull's greeted me with a calm smile, the kind of someone who knows they've placed the key piece on the board. "We have everything," he said, handing me a folder. "Everything necessary for a formal investigation to be opened. If they try to close the sale, the buyer will receive a notification that they're acquiring a disputed property. No bank will touch that, and if they insist, they'll face legal consequences." I stayed silent, absorbing the words. "And Mark?" I asked. "Identity theft, forgery of a notary's signature, real estate fraud," he listed, as if reading a punishment menu. "None of that is swept under the rug." I looked at him straight. "Do you think it'll come to trial?" "That's up to him, but if he continues as he has, yes. And I'm warning you, Mrs. Hawkins, he's not going to stop because of guilt. Don't expect remorse, just reactions." I nodded. He was right. Mark wasn't going to stop for love. If he didn't stop when he packed my things without asking, he'd do even less now. And what's next? Wait. The records are locked, the notice is issued. The local prosecutor's office already has the report. Now we let them knock on the door. I clung to the folder as if it were a shield, because it was. "Thank you, Mr. Holes, for believing me." He bowed slightly with that rare respect. "It's not a question of believing you, it's a matter of justice. You're doing the right thing." I left with firmer steps. No more doubts, no more "maybe I'm exaggerating." I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a citizen defending her right, a woman rescuing her dignity. All that was missing was a knock at the door, because I was ready, very ready. Sunday afternoon, I was climbing the stairs with clean clothes folded in a basket when I heard it. Mark was coming down with his phone in one hand and that crooked smile he wore when he thought he was smarter than everyone. I stepped aside to let him pass. "No thanks," he said, but just as he was about to keep going, he added, "Enjoy the view while you can, Ma." I stopped dead. I didn't look at him, didn't even breathe. I let those words sink in like cold daggers. "While you can," as if I were counting down days to be thrown out, as if I hadn't raised this house from its foundations, filled every room with love and sacrifice. I climbed the rest of the steps without a word, but inside, something changed. Until that moment, I still held a thread of hope, a part of me that thought, maybe he'll realize, maybe he'll reconsider. But that phrase wasn't said by a son, it was said by an enemy. And then I saw clearly, Mark no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as a barrier between him and his greed, a human obstacle to remove. I went into my room and left the clothes on the bed. I closed the door and locked it, not out of fear, but out of a need for silence. I looked in the mirror. The reflection was the same as always, wrinkles, gray hair, a tired look. But inside, I was no longer the same. Something in me had hardened, not in wickedness, but in determination. I wasn't going to break, I wasn't going to beg, and I certainly wasn't going to keep waiting for love from someone who had already erased me from his heart. That night, as I prepared my chamomile tea, my hands were firm. I placed the tablecloth gently, smoothed it with my open palm. Every gesture was a ritual, every sip a promise. This is no longer sadness, I thought. This is preparation. Because if he thought he could push me out of my own house without resistance, he didn't know the woman who brought him into this world. And that woman had just woken up completely. On Monday morning, I went to the bank, not the one I shared with Mark, but the one I used before I got married, where they still knew me by my maiden name. I carried a bag with documents, an old notebook, and a calm that wasn't tranquility, it was clarity. I closed all my joint accounts, transferred every cent to a new account under my name, protected by a trust that no one else could touch, not Mark, not anyone. I appointed Nora as secondary co-owner, because if something happened to me, I needed someone decent to defend what was mine. Nora accepted without hesitation. Her voice trembled as she hugged me, but her gaze said, "I'm with you." After the bank, I went straight to the notary. I rewrote my will. Everything would go to the trust, nothing to Mark, nothing for those who wanted to sell me like a piece of furniture. Sure, the notary asked with that look they use to avoid family dramas. More than ever, I replied. He already chose his side. That same day, I changed the locks. I said the garage door had been stuck, and the locksmith understood everything without asking questions. Mark noticed nothing. He kept ordering food, browsing the internet with my address, watching football in the living room, talking about his plans. I smiled. I served the tea. But every step I took was a silent closing of the doors he thought were eternal. That night, while he snored on the couch, I went to the kitchen and turned on just one light. I opened the recipe book I'd hidden among the bowls. There, between a page of lemon cake, I kept a copy of the new documents. I touched them with my fingers, like caressing an old weapon, because they weren't just papers, they were my defense, my shield, my way of saying, "This is as far as you go." Power doesn't shout, it executes. And I had just shielded my life without raising my voice. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside me, I could already feel the roar of approaching justice. 2 weeks later, the morning dawned with a different breeze, colder, with a thicker silence. I was on the porch watering the flower pots when a black car stopped in front of the house. No logos, no haste, but with that presence you recognize immediately. A man in a dark suit stepped out, holding a folder. "Mrs. Margaret Hawkins?" he asked. "The same," I replied, hose still in hand. "Is Mark Hawkins at home?" I knew it. I'd received the report. The time had come. "Yes, he's inside." "May I ask on behalf of whom?" "Department of Real Estate Investigations. There's a formal complaint for fraud in a property transaction. We need to talk to him." I didn't scream. I didn't get excited. I just nodded. "Let me call him," I said, walking in calmly. I found him in the kitchen, eating the last yogurt like the world owed him something. "Mark," I said in a flat voice, "they're looking for you at the door." "Who?" "An agent. Says it's about some papers." He got up without hurry, with that arrogance he loved to wear. But as soon as he crossed the door and saw the man with the folder, his face changed. He paled, took a step back. "What? What's going on?" "Mark Hawkins, we need to ask some questions about the deed to this property and the documentation presented. There are indications of forgery." "What? Who said that?" "There's a signed complaint with legal support. Everything is documented." He looked at me, eyes filled with fury. "Was it you?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him with the same serenity one uses to watch a storm, knowing their house is well cemented. "What did you do, Ma?" "Nothing, son. I only defended what's mine." And for the first time, I saw him tremble, not from fear of punishment, but from the loss of control. Because that dead weight he thought he could remove without noise had just shifted all the ground beneath his feet. We were in the living room, the officers standing by the door, when Mark burst out. "I trusted you," he cried, eyes red with rage. "How could you do this to me?" "You," I repeated, without raising my voice. "You did this. You forged my signature. You stole my documents. You tried to sell my house as if I were an old chair that gets in the way." He gasped, as if the words cut off his air. "I needed it more than you," he blurted out desperately. "You're just sitting there, waiting to die." That phrase fell like a hammer on my heart, but it didn't break me. "So everything I did for you is worthless? Taking care of you when you were sick, working extra hours to pay for your university, to buy your first car? That was your decision. No one forced you." I nodded once. It's true, it was my decision. And if I could turn back time today, I'd do it all the same. But this part, Mark, this betrayal, you won't get my forgiveness for that. The officers watched in silence, knowing there was no point interrupting, witnessing a judgment deeper than the legal one. You thought I'd let you erase me, lock me in a residence, take my house, my life, without saying anything. He looked down for the first time, but not out of shame, out of calculation, searching for a way out, as always. Well, you see, I said, taking a deep breath. You underestimated me. And with that, I'm done. I turned to the officers. I have nothing left to say to him. If you need proof, I have it. If you need testimony, I'll give it. One of them nodded, opening the folder. It'd be best if he accompanied us to the station. He can respond calmly there. Mark turned, looking at me one last time, but this time he didn't see me as his mother. He saw me as his judge. The police station smelled of cheap disinfectant and resignation. I sat up straight, clutching my folder firmly as Mark was taken to the interrogation room. Mrs. Hawkins, an officer called, "You can come in." I entered with steady steps, not with hatred, with certainty. I handed over the audios, the property registry documents, the photo of the forged notary, even a napkin with notes of dates and exact phrases he'd said, unaware I was listening with intent. All this supports the complaint, the officer said, checking each item. Very thorough. I nodded. There was nothing more to explain. The truth was written on every sheet. Mark watched me from the adjoining room, a glass separating us. I saw him clearly. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he was, because his expression was the same as when he was a child who broke something and didn't know if he'd be punished or consoled. But now he wasn't a child, and this wasn't mischief. I approached the glass, not for drama, but out of necessity, so he'd know I saw him, that I still recognized him, even if I no longer knew him. He looked at me, and for a moment, the hatred mixed with something sadder, incomprehension, as if he couldn't believe his mother was capable of turning him in like this. And that's when I understood something painful but necessary. He never thought I'd do this, because he never saw me as a woman, only as a resource, someone who endures. He never thought I had limits, but I did, and he'd crossed them all. I turned away, not out of pride, but dignity, because I had nothing left to say. The officer followed me to the exit. He's likely facing formal charges, he said. Thank you for collaborating. You've done the right thing. I didn't reply. It was enough to know I'd spoken when it was time, acted when no one else would have done it for me. As I walked away from the station, I knew with complete clarity, I'm not the villain in this story. I was just the only one who dared to put an end to it. Days later, I returned to Mr. Hull's office, this time not as a victim, but as someone who'd survived the storm and came out with her head held high. He greeted me with a different smile, more relaxed. Good news, he said, lifting a sheet with an official seal. The sale has been canceled. The buyer was informed of the fraud and withdrew from the process. The registry has reversed the change of ownership. The house is legally back in your name, without any pending dispute. I sat down slowly, as if I couldn't believe it immediately. But there it was, on paper, in ink, justice. And Mark? I asked. Formal charges were filed for attempted real estate fraud, forgery of a signature, and obstruction of property. The district attorney has accepted the case. The process now continues its course. I didn't ask for details. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Because when you survive such a betrayal, you don't need revenge, you need peace. Your testimony was key, he added. And such precise documentation, impressive. I smiled, not out of pride, but relief. It's not that I'm an expert, I said. It's that a single woman learns to record everything if she wants to be believed. I signed the last statement, the final documents, and when I left, I stopped for a moment at his office door. Thank you, Mr. Holes, for believing a mother who only wanted to defend her home. You didn't just defend a house, Mrs. Hawkins. You defended your story. I walked back with sunlight on my shoulders, the same sun that lit the rosebushes when we planted them, the same that came through the window when Mark learned to walk. The house wasn't just a place, it was my life, my memory, and nobody had the right to take it away. That night, I slept with the door open and a calm soul. For the first time in weeks, after rage and fear, My name was clean, my home protected, and my dignity intact.